Welcome to Trial by Wine. We take a closer look at crimes that highlight how fascinating humans can be. Schmidty, Swanee and Clarkey visit crimes and run them through their jury of three, debating both sides of the case to agree an appropriate, if totally fictitious, sentence. Please be advised, Trial by Wine may include explicit or disturbing content and will include drunken rambling. Listener discretion is advised. All right, how are we?
Great.
Very well.
Yes, good to be joining you on a chilly little winter's evening.
Cold. It's been freezing, hasn't it, lately?
Yes.
It's English weather. The other day I walked outside and said, "Oh, it's cold enough to snow," and thought, "Oh my God, I'm back in England." Yeah. And it was cold enough to snow. And in fact, I was at Kyneton and it snowed.
And it
so there you go. Yeah. Just, it didn't settle, but, it was flakes. Yeah.
It's that time of year where I desperately look ahead at the forecast hoping for some sunshine. And I said to Stu on the couch before, I might just check the weather. And there's one day next week where it's a minimum of 1 and a maximum of 8.
Oh, scorcho.
I think we should all just be allowed to stay in bed that day.
Yeah. I think so.
Like the whole country.
You're right. Remember when we were kids and when it got over 38 degrees, they'd send you home from school because it was too hot to be at school? I think there should be a reverse version of that where if it doesn't get over 10 degrees, you shouldn't have to go anywhere. I loved it. When I was in England, when it did start to snow, because for a lot of the time I was there, it didn't really snow over the winter. And then at the end of 2008, I think it was 2009, something like that, we had a real whiteout. I'd never seen it. And the whole time I'd been there. And there were feet of snow, and all the schools were closed, and everything was closed, and you couldn't go to work and no one expected you to because you couldn't get there safely. And I thought, this is grouse.
More of that shit.
Absolutely. I'm happy to put my boiler on and get the heating ramped up and work from home, no problem.
Maybe if we just got little snowmakers made and pumped it into the driveway.
At 38 degrees.
Like in winter.
Right.
When it's 1 to 8, may as well.
I can't get out, mate. I'm literally snow locked. I can't help you.
No one's sorry. And I can't believe it only snowed literally across my driveway where the gate is.
How does that happen? I know.
Shocking.
But I've got a 12-foot drift there, so I'm not coming to work. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
See you in a few weeks.
Once it's melted. Yeah. Beautiful. So, have you got any news other than it's cold?
We made salami on the weekend.
Again, I'm still eating your last salami, no pun intended.
Oh, stop it. It's an all-day gobstopper.
Still chewing down on your last bit of sausage you gave me.
Yes. So we're very excited about that. It's hanging outside and we're hoping that we don't all of a sudden get a rat infestation. But it's such a fun day.
Well, my experience of making sausages was probably less fun because I was a child and it was in our shed. Yes, it was winter. But Dad would butcher a pig and we, have to make the chabai out of it. And that's how he burnt down the shed. The original shed was a stable and he had the smokehouse in it. And then mysteriously it burnt down and we're pretty sure. They said, maybe a rat or a possum got in there. Maybe.
Maybe.
Ancient timber stables burns down. What a surprise. But yes, I remember it was being cold and everyone being grumpy. So it wasn't that much fun. But I'm sure as an adult it'd be much more enjoyable.
It is much more. Tell me though, did you ever make long pig sausages?
That pig, when it hung in our shed, it was always very long, that pig. But it wasn't a human, no. So we only made pork, of the other white meat.
Right, the other white meat, yes.
I have no news. I didn't make any salami. I went up to the houseboat actually and on the weekend and I spent it with a couple of girlfriends and I who are doing this. We call it Hot Girl Summer. I think I've talked to you about it. Yes, you have. Where we sit on a couch, eat a shit ton of food and sit there like beached whales and watch Below Deck. I suppose we should introduce ourselves. I'm Schmidty.
And I'm Clarkey. Together we are Trial by Wine. Minus Swanee.
Who's still gallivanting around the UK. That's right. Oh, not the UK, just Europe.
Yeah,
all of Europe. She's
not
everywhere.
Even jealous that she's in summer.
Actually, she hasn't, as far as I know, hasn't posted a single photo, so I have no idea where she is. But she told us she was going to Europe, and I'm prepared to believe it. Yeah.
Yes.
So, yes, she's off. You're stuck with us, listeners. Sorry about that.
Yes.
And what are we drinking?
Oh, we're having a nice little feather-top Pinot Noir, also known as a Point Newer.
I am on a little story with this. So I'm coming to you live from Echuca, where I am I've got an event tomorrow in Echuca, so I've come up tonight. So I'm in a hotel right now, and on my way here, I came via Heathcote. And as I hit Heathcote, I thought, should I turn left, which is the direction I'm supposed to go in, or should I turn right and go to Heathcote Winery?
I mean, of course you should go right.
And at the same time, my bladder was saying, I really need a wee. So I thought, I'd better go to Heathcote Winery, or at least a public toilet, because I had another hour and a half to go before I got to Echuca. But I also thought the lovely man from Heathcote Wineries called me a couple of times recently and left messages telling me about their latest specials, because I'm a wine member, of course, club member. He talks about my favourite one, because even though he tries to always upsell me to the rump or whatever the other expensive wines they have, he says, oh, and by the way, the one that you really like, the HQ, is on sale for blah, blah. As a member, it's I nearly said $1. It's $10.83, the HQ, which is this is the 2023, so it's pretty young Shiraz, but it's still as drinkable as it's ever been. And I got a cheeky dozen, because also on my way I thought, oh, we're recording tonight and I don't have anything to drink. And then I solved it by getting myself 12 bottles of Heathcote Shiraz. You can
get sloshed.
Well, I've got an event tomorrow and I've got to be up at the crack of dawn, so I can't be too sloshed. Anyway, so that's Heathcote Shiraz HQ, and it's delicious and nutritious. Would you like to hear a story?
I'd love to.
Go on.
Yes. Yes, I would.
Have you got
is
your
it a sad
seatbelts?
story, or is it
yeah, this is a buckle yourselves in for this one. Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
Take it away then.
So, the last story I covered, if you recall, was about Mark and Diane, two American kids growing up in the heartland.
Yes.
And if you recall, Diane was a bit naughty, used antifreeze a little liberally, killed Mark.
You get some antifreeze, and you get some antifreeze, and you get some antifreeze.
It's like a sprinkler.
That's right. Everyone gets antifreeze.
Because she had her favourites, didn't she?
Just the one, Rachel. Rachel was a favourite. Yes. At the time, you asked me if there was such a thing called familicide, and whilst in that episode, I kept referring it to family annihilation. Basically, the terms are used interchangeably for the same thing. So I'm going to tell you another horrific story about this form of mass murder.
Right, your love.
Yay!
Thanks for brightening our day.
So my sources are crimetraveller.org, Wikipedia, Murderpedia, all that's interesting, weirdnj.com, abcnews.go.com, thesun.co.uk, crimelibrary.com, and that had a huge piece by Catherine Ramsland, which was very good. There is also a podcast about this, of which name I can't recall. It goes into enormous detail. In fairness, I didn't have time to listen to it, but it's probably really good, so I'll tell you about that at the end, should I remember.
Great.
I did, but I didn't listen to it, so I'm not quoting it or referencing it. But I'm very confident that the two girls who do that podcast have done a much better job of it than me. But here you go.
It makes me more comfortable that you don't remember the name of it now that I know that you haven't listened to it and therefore you're not referencing it.
Well, I sort of do know the name of it, but it's a giveaway. So it's one of those.
Right.
It's the old spoiler alert in the name of a podcast or a source.
Gotcha.
So from crimetraveller.org, criminologists have been conducting increasing research into the phenomenon of familicide. I always call it familiacide because of my Italian speaking stuff. So familia, right? It's familicide. So
right.
I will mispronounce that all the time because in my head it's been familiacide, but it's familicide.
As long as everyone knows why, that's okay.
Because they're familiar, it's the familiar side. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so criminologists have been conducting increasing research into the phenomenon of familicide and in the process have produced many terms and definitions to describe such acts and distinguish them from each other. Familicide, the family annihilator, murder-suicides and family murders are all terms that have been used to describe cases where a family member has killed other family members.
Sounds like most Christmas parties, most Christmas days.
Well, verbally perhaps, not actually, literally in my family, but maybe verbally, yeah. The very definitions of the term familicide can make a comparison of studies and cases challenging. Familicide sits among a number of types of family murder, all utilising the term cide, which means the act of killing in Latin, often adding to the confusion over terminology.
I'm assuming we're talking about side, C-I-D-E, not
C-I-D-E,
S-I-D-E.
not S-I-D-E. No, C-I-D-E, that's right.
You're on my side, therefore I won't kill you.
I will kill you, the act of
You're
killing. You're on my act of killing.
Yeah.
No one wants to be on my CIDE. Yeah. So matricide, the killing of one's mother. Patricide, the killing of one's father. Siblicide, the killing of one's siblings. Fratricide, the killing of one's brother. And I do recall the lyrics in Joseph and his Technicolor Dreamcoat. This happens after the brothers have fallen on hard times. They go to Egypt, not recognising Joe, who's made it big, so they beg off him. Joseph found it a strain not to laugh because not a brother among them knew who he was. I shall now take them all for a ride. After all they have tried fratricide.
Ah, there you go.
There are just words sometimes that come up in songs and you think, what was the lyricist on at the time?
Yeah.
It's like there was a song, I can't remember who it's by, and she uses the word hyperbole. I'm like, jeepers. Can you remember who it is? Natalie.
Bassingthwaite?
Yes, could be. So fratricide. So sororicide is the killing of one's sister. Filicide, the killing of one's child, and uxoricide, the killing of one's wife. And I don't really, obviously in Latin, uxor must be wife.
Is there a killing of one's husband then?
No, because, we wouldn't kill your husband because he's your husband.
Also, several stories we have covered.
It's like there's no word for the equivalent of a nymphomaniac to describe a man. It's just the inherent sexism in language.
Why is it nymphomaniac only a woman?
It's for a woman only. Nymphomaniac doesn't apply to men. That's right, yes. You might now be what do they call you might have a sex addiction. You might have a sex addiction, or you might be a predator. There are new terms, but there's never been an equivalent of what I say? I just nearly said necrophilia. I've had too much wine.
Yeah, already. Jesus, this is going to be bad.
Nymphomaniac. There's no equivalent word for men as a nymphomaniac, other than a stud.
Killing your sex-addicted wife?
That would be uxoronymphicide, I think.
And what about, because we did say killing your child, but what about like bubicide, which is like either killing your little baby or killing your big fat bald husband who's in jail?
I've not heard
either way. No, I just made it up. But
no, I know, but I mean, I've not heard of a term that answers that question.
Okay.
Bubicide. Oh, no, it's still not husband. Parricide is the last of the sides, and that's the killing of one's parents.
Yeah, right.
As I said regarding Diane Stoudy, it's relatively rare for a woman to kill her family. From a study published in the Howard Journal of Criminal Justice in 2014, where newspaper articles from 1980 to 2012 reported familicide, in 59 of 71 cases the perpetrator was male, and over half were between the ages of 30 to 40 years old at the time of the crime.
Well, I'm past that danger period. That's a relief.
57 of the cases happened at home, and in 68% of the cases, the male annihilator committed suicide after the murders.
It always annoys me. Why don't they just commit suicide to start with and do the world a favour? I mean, I don't want people to be committing suicide, but I don't want them killing other people and then doing it.
Yeah, well, maybe what I'm about to go on to answers or doesn't answer that, probably doesn't. But anyway, Professor David Wilson has stated that the family annihilators have received little attention as a separate category of killer, and they're often treated like spree or serial murderers. a view which presupposes traits such as the idea that the murderer snaps or that after killing their partner or children, the killer may force a standoff with the police, death by police, which is not an entirely accurate representation of these killers. In most of these cases, the perpetrators had good backgrounds, no criminal records, good families and friends, and no red flags that would indicate they would kill anyone, let alone their family. More often than not, they're middle-aged men with good jobs and seem to be the model father, husband, and family man. So, with that in mind, let me introduce you to John Emil List. Born on September 17, 1925 to German-American parents Frederick and Alma, John had a pretty good upbringing. His father was a devout Lutheran and Sunday school teacher, and I read somewhere that he'd been pretty strict in terms of his religious beliefs, but I wouldn't have thought that odd at the time, and certainly not from a German-American immigrant or family line, having been raised as a half Hungarian Australian. John went to Bay City Central High School and graduated in 1943, and like many young men at the time, enlisted in the Army, serving as a lab technician during World War II. After the war, John was discharged and went to the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, where he got a degree in business admin and a master's of accounting. He's a very exciting man. And was commissioned as a second lieutenant through the Reserve Officers Training Corps. So relatively ordinary. He's an accountant doing accounting in the Army.
Nothing to see here?
Not at this point.
So far.
So John served in the Korean War, and it was in 1951 at Fort Eustis in Virginia. Shout out to our friends from the CIA listening, since I did the MK Ultra story, where he met Helen Morris Taylor in a bowling alley. Helen was a war widow after her husband was killed in Korea, leaving her a single mother at 24 years of age. She lived near John with her daughter. Only 2 months after meeting John and Helen married on the 1st of December, 1951.
That's too fast. I don't want to sound judgy, but that's too fast.
Well, it might have something to do with the fact that Helen had told John that she was pregnant.
She was pregnant. That old chestnut.
Was she? Wasn't. She was a truth stretcher.
Oh, no.
Honey trap, honey trap, honey trap. Once he'd completed his Korean tour, John went off to work as an accountant for a paper company in Kalamazoo. Oh, what a girl, a real pipperoo. I liked her looks when I carried her books in Kalamazoo, zoo, 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 zoo. Now, he did pretty... Oh, it's a Glenn Miller classic. I can't believe it. You spent enough time with my father. You must have heard Kalamazoo. K-A-L-A-M-A-Z-O. Whoa, 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 what a gal. I can't believe you've never heard it.
I mean, yes. How could I argue with that?
And it's the right period, sort of.
Yes.
Glenn Miller died in the war, so it's not quite the right period. But he was still pretty popular in 1950, whatever. And while he was at the paper place doing the accounting, he did pretty well there, and he was promoted.
Did you say doing the accountant?
Yeah.
I sort of said doing the accountant. But I can see that would have been heard. I can appreciate that you would have heard doing the accountant.
I had a mouthful of wine.
He was the accountant, so I don't think he was doing himself, but maybe he was. At any rate, he was so good at that job, though, that he was promoted to general supervisor. Over this period, he and Helen had 3 children. Patricia was the eldest, born in 1955, John Frederick, born in 1956, and Frederick, born in 1958. By 1959, Helen's health had deteriorated. She had developed an addiction to alcohol and was a bit unstable due to the fact that she had syphilis.
Oh, that old chestnut.
Yes, and though I'm not sure if she actually knew at the time, because I've read multiple reports that suggest that she knew all along, but she never told John. But I think it's possible she wasn't actually diagnosed at this point in time. So syphilis is gross and has many symptoms, but relevant to Helen's situation are the following from health.newsouthwales.gov.au. That's right, syphilis is still prevalent in today's society. Syphilis can invade the nervous system at any stage of infection, including soon after infection, and causes a wide range of symptoms, including headache, altered behaviour, difficulty coordinating muscle movements, paralysis, numbness, and dementia. This invasion of the nervous system is called neurosyphilis. Like neurosyphilis, syphilis can invade eye structures at any stage of infection, including soon after infection. Symptoms may include vision loss, blurry vision, eye pain, eye redness, or even permanent blindness. This invasion of the eye structures is called ocular syphilis. It's quite a nice name.
Fascinating chenille.
Yes.
Oculosyphilis. It's like something out of Harry Potter.
Oculosyphilis, yes. Is that what they say? Is that the spell to blind people?
Oculosyphilis.
Oculosyphilis.
So, and we're at this point, I think I'm talking about the sort of 1960s, but Helen was suffering at this point from altered behaviour, and I know she also had ocular syphilis, and I don't know whether she was partially blind by 1960, but she certainly did lose most of her sight later. Helen's daughter from her first marriage got married in 1960 and moved out with her husband, and so John and Helen and their children moved to Rochester, New York, where he got a job with Xerox, and again he did well and was made Director of Accounting Services. His career appearing to be on the up and up, by 1965, John got a job of comptroller, not to be confused with controller.
I'm
I
already
thought it was
confused.
a spello. So I looked it up because it's the kind of nonsense I do, and it's spelled COMPTROLLER.
Yes.
And it's basically means controlling all the bank stuff, but for some reason it's got a couple of extra letters there. Comptroller.
Nice.
Anyway, this was at a bank in New Jersey, and they moved to a spectacular 19-room Victorian mansion called Breeze Knoll.
19 rooms?
Yep.
Did they get a cleaner?
Classic. No, I think that was Helen's job. She just had to
Blind
feel
Helen
her way
had to
around
do
the
it.
rooms. Had to feel her way around them. No, we'll get on to what happened in the house. The thing is, he'd actually lost his job at Xerox, and his job at the bank only lasted a year. So they had this big outlay.
Massive house and no money.
Yeah.
What could go wrong?
Also living with them at the mansion was John's mum, Alma, and as his dad had died back in 1944. In fact, the only reason they could get the house was because Alma agreed to help with the deposit on the proviso that she was able to move in with them. Sadly, this would prove a bad decision, as she also signed over her power of attorney to John and lost pretty much all of her autonomy at that point. Yeah, poor choice, Alma, sorry. So everything seemed okay, though when they bought the house, they did know at the time that they'd overextended themselves a bit.
But he had a good job. He
had a job at that time.
Fat comptroller.
He was a fat comptroller, that's right. The house was reported to have been the most expensive house in the neighbourhood. It had a grand ballroom and marble fireplaces and a stained glass skylight. You know, when
what
you think
a
about...
load of old... I mean, that's
No,
too
it was a
big.
cracker, right?
Yeah,
it
but
was
for
too big.
3 people...
Six people, but yeah, still too big. But you know, this skylight, right? Think of one of those films you see where someone's on a roof and there's like this glass structure.
Yeah,
Usually they fall through it or they're breaking in.
Well, that's when you said that. That's exactly where my head went.
It was that kind of large glass structure, and allegedly it was actually because it was stained glass, and apparently it was a Tiffany & Co. piece.
Wow.
Which, as it turns out, was worth a flipping fortune. And if he'd known that and he'd sold just that, he probably would
have
have
house down.
Sorted everything at that point. But he didn't know that, so moot point. Anyway, whilst the house was exceptionally grand, the Lists had to economise to some degree, especially after he's lost his job. Whilst Helen enjoyed retail therapy, and apparently she enjoyed retail therapy quite a lot, didn't seem to extend to furnishing the house or turning the heating on, which I also understand, and my house is quite a bit smaller. Eco panels and heated throw rugs are the go around here. That's why now I'm in a chuka in a hotel room, I've had the aircon on nice and high. Whilst John wasn't super social at work, he was described as a bit aloof and he didn't seem to have many friends. He was seen as a pretty good father and husband. He, along with the kids, Helen and Alma, went to church every Sunday, and John was a Sunday school teacher also, although, in fairness, Helen wasn't actually into the church stuff at all. His neighbours noted...
Helen?
she wasn't a Lutheran. She wasn't in anything. She'd rather stay at home and drink, I think. His neighbours noted...
Helen.
You and Helen have quite a lot in common right now.
Yeah.
His neighbours noted that he was a bit odd. He mowed the lawn dressed in his suit and tie, which is a far cry from the bathrobe that my neighbours see me in all the time. And so do you.
Do you mow the lawns in your bathrobe?
No, but I put the bins out and I maybe pull some weeds.
Yeah, that doesn't count.
I do sort of like strange lady standing in her bathrobe stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, you'd nail that shit though. There you go. There's that crazy cat woman who doesn't have any cats.
Without cats, that's right, yeah. As we know, there's always something lurking under the surface. Helen's condition deteriorated, and by 1969, she was no longer going to church at all. It was quite abusive to John, telling him that she was crap in bed compared to her first husband, and would fly.
Did he get syphilis?
The first husband had syphilis, so John should have said, "At least I didn't go around giving people syphilis."
No, but did John get syphilis?
Not reported ever. So I don't think so. And I don't know how it works. As in, I would have thought there was a good chance that he would have, but not sure. So she was addicted to I mean, you could Google that.
Or not. Like. No, I just thought, you know a lot of stuff.
Well, I was telling this story, pre-telling this story, because I said, we were having dinner, and I said, I've got to go. And then someone said, what are you doing? I said, we've got this podcast. And I said, I'm doing this story about the family annihilator. And the question of the syphilis came up. And it made me think of Henry VIII, because part of the problem with Henry VIII was that he couldn't produce, because he had syphilis, he struggled to produce a male heir. And they had one, I think he had one male heir, but he died young. He was a sickly child because of the syphilis. And I thought, well, this is interesting, because then Helen went on to have 2 boys and a girl. So I'm guessing syphilis attacks males and female reproductive organs differently. Again, I don't. And I said, no, actually, now that you talk about it, my sole kind of background of syphilis is Henry VIII. Just going way back. So Helen was addicted to alcohol and tranquilizers, and was spending money that they didn't have and ignoring the kids.
I mean, there's some classics, red flags right there.
She was
addicted to alcohol
and
tranquilizers, and spending money that I didn't have.
But it was the late 60s, and a lot of women, I think a lot of housewives, I've watched Mad Men, right? So I know everything. And, they seem to be into the Valium, and isn't it Valley of the Dolls? Was the book written about the same sort of period of women who are pill popping and drinking and just disillusioned and have nothing to do, and
I haven't watched Mad Men, so I don't know.
Terribly boring lives, stuck at home looking after the children with no careers or nothing.
Tranking themselves off their heads.
Well, frankly, I would too.
Because they don't like baking. Yeah.
I would too. I would be a massive alcoholic if I had to stay at home and just look after my husband.
As opposed to what you've become.
What have I become? What slur was that?
Just a minor alcoholic.
Oh, only when we're doing the show these days.
Not a massive alcoholic. Is that the only time you drink?
Pretty much, yeah.
God.
Yeah. I know, it's great. It's my excuse.
We drink most days.
No, I've cut it right back. For no reason other than sometimes I just don't feel like it lately. In case you missed it, she was addicted to alcohol and tranquilizers and was spending money that they didn't have and ignoring the kids, leaving the parenting to John. She was also blind by now and was no longer going to church. And it was around this time that Helen was diagnosed with cerebral atrophy, which I'm going to say must be her brain was dying.
Yeah.
And that was when the syphilis diagnosis became known to John, so 1969, and he was told to have her institutionalised, but he wouldn't do that.
Aww.
Now,
he likes her too much.
What
I like
guy,
my alcoholic tranquilised wife who spends money that we don't have and ignores
nearly
the
30
kids.
Years. At this point, they'd been married nearly 30 years, and at some point he liked her. Alma was a fairly standard, so Alma, the mother, was a fairly standard German-American mother. She never liked Helen. She didn't think she was good enough for her son. And it would be fair to say John was henpecked by his mother. Now, remember, when they bought the house, Alma, part of the deal of Alma putting the down payment was that she would move in. So he's got a very strong, controlling mother telling him what to do, and he's got a wife who's way off the rails. Patricia, the eldest girl, was behaving like most teenagers, allegedly smoking, possibly taking some recreational drugs, hanging out with the bad kids, doing Satan's work in the form of drama, and allegedly dabbling in witchcraft. Which,
surely she's knocking off some of Mum's tranquilizers.
Well, she might have been, but I think she was doing, dope at school and stuff, the ganja. And frankly, everything that I just described is fairly normal in a teenager.
Nowadays.
It's certainly, even then, you hear lots of people talk about, I wouldn't say I was a witch, but, I started buying crystals, and like my nieces have done the same thing. You just go through the kind of I'll call it light occult period. And I
Maybe it's
But
a
went down,
spiritual.
maybe. I went down this rabbit hole with this bit of the story around Patricia. And I came across a blogger who, I can't remember who they were, but they said that they had gone to school with her. And they put all of these salacious, unsupported statements about Patricia having an affair with a drama teacher and some other woman. And it was just all this stuff. Anyway, none of it's relevant. But there was this sort of talk around Patricia where, because she was good girl going bad, it may play into where John ends up. That's all I'm saying, right? So I didn't
Right.
believe a lot of what this person was saying, but I think it's fair to say she's acting out at her age. She's 15 or 16.
So now he's got 3 challenging women around him.
Yes. So the big issue was that John had lost his job at the bank, and from what I gathered, couldn't hold down subsequent jobs. So he'd gone from having a strong career to suddenly being unemployed. And this was a serious issue for him, both in terms of paying the mortgage and bills, but also from a social standing perspective. Too embarrassed to tell his wife, what was the film? Is it the stripper one that Tony loves? The Full Monty, where one of them gets dressed every day and acts like he goes off to work because he's lost his job for months. Yeah, same thing, right? He was too embarrassed to tell his wife. So like that bloke, he spent months dressing for work, going to the train station where he would peruse the job ads and try to get work. He did get a little bit of work, but I think at that point he'd fallen into quite a bit of debt, and the new job wasn't paying anywhere near as much as he was earning in previous roles. John had even been taking money from his mother's accounts as he had power of attorney to cover the mortgage. And by November 1971, the bank was now threatening to foreclose. For a man who had lived his life with careful control, the situation was spiraling and he couldn't get enough money. His kids were acting out. His wife was totally out of control. His mum was, being his mum. That Helen's not good enough for you. Mein handy. So, in what was clearly a very carefully considered plan, possibly taking months to work out, John decided the only way to manage going forward was to kill his family. I mean, it's pretty obvious, really. In October 1971, John applied for a firearms registration for home protection, though clearly that was not what they were to be used for. The timing of this is important. So, October 1971.
Right.
When you think about premeditation.
Right.
So, on November the 9th, 1971, now if you were Swanee, I'd be saying, get ready to take your headsets off.
Oh, no. Hang on. Let me have a drink then.
And I have pared it back, so it's not. I've tried not to be too graphic, but it's pretty bad. So, November 9, 1971, John took action. He started by cancelling the milk order and the newspapers by leaving notes for the delivery men. Then he waited for the children to go to school. He went into the kitchen where Helen was preparing breakfast and drinking coffee. I think she was actually eating toast. He walked up behind her and shot her in the back of the head with a 1912 Steyr 9mm automatic pistol. Helen died instantly, though apparently he also fired further bullets which hit the wall, which they think could have been an automatic reflex. He went upstairs to the 3rd floor to his mother's apartment. She was in the kitchen, also making some toast for herself. She asked about the noise that she'd heard from downstairs. By his own testimony later, he says he gave her a kiss, and then he raised his gun and shot her in the face above her left eye. And again, he shot fired 2 other shots into the wall. Alma was a heavy-set lady, and whilst he wanted to take her downstairs, he found her too hard to move. So he put her on a carpet runner and pulled her into a storage area and then tried to clean up the blood with a newspaper and a towel. He then went back downstairs and dragged Helen's corpse by the feet, down the hall and into the ballroom. He put her on a sleeping bag, covered her with a bath towel and a tea towel on her head to cover her face, and then he did a bit of a clean-up. And he penned some more notes, one to his boss and to the kids' school, saying that he was taking the family to North Carolina to see Helen's mother, and he'd be gone for a while. Of course, the kids were still at school, so he went outside and raked some leaves, which he was seen doing by a neighbour. And then he had some lunch at the same table where he'd shot his wife of 20 years not long before. As it turned out, Patricia, the daughter, wasn't feeling very well, and the school rang and asked him to pick her up, so he did. Now, it wasn't in the plan, But it would have been pretty hard to get out of, to say,
Can't
no,
hide.
she can just get herself home. The plan was there, but this is just a bit earlier than anticipated. So when he went and picked her up, and when they got home, he then rushed into the house to be there in the house before her, and he hid behind a door. When Patricia came in, he shot her in the back of the head.
Fuck.
As with Helen, he dragged her to the bed into the ballroom and laid her on a sleeping bag. Then later, he picked up Fred from his after-school job and, like Patricia, shot him in the head when he came in the door. He hadn't even had time to take his coat off, Fred that is, Fred Jr. Again, he dragged him into the ballroom and placed him next to Patricia with his head touching Helen's. John Jr., who's the eldest, I think, was at soccer practice and not expected home immediately, so John Sr. went about his business. When John Jr. came home earlier than expected, there was still blood all over the kitchen. So John Sr. tried to shoot him the second he entered the room. John Jr., however, grabbed his hand and there was a struggle with several shots going into the floor, the cabinet and the dining room window. Unfortunately, though, John Jr. was shot in the back and the head. He didn't die instantly, though, so John kept shooting at him. John Jr. dragged himself across the floor and turned over, so, he's commando-style crawling, and then he turns over, where John Sr. shot him in the eye. Still not killing him.
What?
Well, that's what I read, but he was twitching, so maybe it was nerves, I'm not sure. John Sr. thought he was still alive, so he shot him another 10 times.
What?
Sorry, shot him 10 times in total to ensure he was dead. Again, he was dragged into the ballroom and laid out with the others. And all of the family had their faces covered by towels. In fact, they were on sleeping bags and they had towels over them and towels over their heads. So to a unsuspecting passerby, you wouldn't have recognised that it was a pile of bodies straight away. John then knelt and prayed over them. The motivation for the murders were pure. He didn't want them to know poverty or lead sinful lives, so he spared them the anguish. What a guy.
That's the reason?
Yeah, pretty much. His planning was so good that he'd actually mailed a letter to himself, which was delivered that afternoon while he was getting ready to get out of Dodge. And I'm not really sure what the point of the whole sending a letter to himself thing was. I was a bit confused by that. Anyway, the point is, he didn't send the letter on that day, right? So he's planned this.
Yeah.
That evening he rang his Lutheran pastor, telling him that the family had gone to North Carolina and he was going to catch up with them, so he wouldn't be teaching Sunday school that week. He also called Patricia's drama teacher, the one I was telling you there were allegations by that mad blogger about the teacher and Patty, to say we're out of town, right? So don't expect her to come to rehearsals for a couple of weeks. He wrote some letters to various people, including a 5-page confession to his pastor. He asked that the kids, and I assume Helen, be cremated as they had asked for that, and Alma to be buried in a plot she already had in Michigan. And so just to be clear on that, several weeks before he killed them, he was sitting down to dinner and he asked them, if you were to die, how would you like to be buried?
No.
Do you want to be buried or cremated?
He's a good egg, isn't he?
And the kids said, I think we'll go for cremation. And the mum said, no, I've got a plot, wherever, probably next to her husband somewhere. And I think Helen probably said, yeah, I don't know, cremate me, because I don't think any of them were assuming they'd be dead in a couple of weeks. So, having worked up an appetite, writing all of his letters and getting his confession out, he had dinner, got some sleep in the billiard room, not far
at the
from
same
his death.
table where he killed his wife? Or?
Probably, yeah. And then he got some sleep in the billiard room, which wasn't far from the ballroom. I tell you, I love the sound of this house. But anyway, then when he woke up, he turned the heating right down to freezing, turned all the lights on and put the radio on nice and loud on a Christian channel. And then he drove off.
Oh.
So on December the 7th, 1971, Patricia's drama teacher, who may or may not have been having an affair with her according to some crazy blogger, but I don't think there was anything in any of that. It's crazy. Uh-huh. But the drama teacher was suspicious because Patty had told him that she thought her dad was going to kill her, and because she hadn't shown up to rehearsals and she was really keen on drama. So he went around the house to check it out. Now, he actually went there on the day of the murder, but seeing all the lights on, figured everything was okay. So then he went over a few other times and eventually thought about calling the cops, but as it turned out, a neighbour beat him to it. The light bulbs, I said he turned on all the lights in the 19-room building. Mm-hmm. The light bulbs have been burning out over time, and the neighbour was like, that's weird. No one's around. The car, like there's no car. She had noticed the strange car of the drama teacher showing up a couple of times and just thought this is really suspicious, and so eventually called the police. About a month afterwards, by the way.
Oh.
When the police arrived, they went through an unlocked window, and it didn't take long for them to suspect something. Blood smears were all over the floors, and of course there was a rather telling smell. When they got to the ballroom, they thought they were looking at a pile of dirty clothes. But it didn't take them too long to realise it was the bodies of Helen, John Jr., Patricia and Fred. They checked the house and of course found Alma upstairs in her rooms, an expression of horror on her face. And a neighbour identified the victims and noted that John, the father, was missing. The investigation led them, of course, to John List. He literally confessed to his pastor after all, but he was nowhere to be found. The children were buried at the insistence of Helen's mother and sister, and Alma was sent to her plot in Michigan. Police kept a careful eye on the funeral, thinking he'd show up, but no. Despite knowing who done it, and the FBI publishing a wanted poster for him, he seemed to have just disappeared. As John had hemorrhoids, or as my father, God rest his soul, would say, Gomer Piles, and was nearsighted, they targeted pharmacies and optometrists all over the country. But to no avail. It was the 70s.
That's a long, like a
long bow
stretch,
to draw.
long bow. Yeah.
9 months later, someone torched the beautiful house, but it wasn't John.
Oh, it wasn't John.
No, I'm going to say it was just someone who didn't really like, because there'd been this grisly murder in this beautiful mansion. I think they must have had a bit of a, macabre tourism happening, people going there to check it out, and people in the neighbourhood didn't like it, so I think someone just decided to go around and burn it down. And it's a shame because it was a beautiful house.
That house is a victim.
It is, yes. Think about that when we come to sentencing. And let's not get started on that Tiffany bloody
I know, right?
skylight, right? Literally a piece of art gone. So John does what all good fathers and husbands who've killed their family do. He just starts again. No longer having a wife who doesn't like him much or a controlling mother.
I've got rid of all that baggage.
Correct. Or naughty kids to deal with and massive debts. He's free to be just whatever he wants. So John had hightailed it to the Rockies near Denver in Colorado and, of course, was living in a rented trailer because, of course, you are, right? If you're on the lam, you're either in a shitty motel or you're in a trailer.
A rented trailer, yeah, with Brittany.
He took on the name Robert P. Clark, who had been a student in the same course as him. No relation to you, I know. But the real Robert didn't remember him at all, so for whatever reason, he just took his name. He faked a social security number and worked as a shift cook at a Holiday Inn. He then moved again and picked up accounting work. Much more his jam. In 1975, he joined a Lutheran church in Denver, which was risky.
Because he's already confessed to one pastor at a Lutheran church, is that?
Because these are his characteristics that over time you might be able to draw a conclusion that he's got the same characteristics as that mass murderer, John List.
I was going to say, is he going to meet a wife at the...
Oh, we'll get on to that, yeah. Not at a bowling alley, though. Not at a bowling alley.
Yeah, not a bowling alley.
A church social, as it turns out.
Yeah,
of
course.
Yeah.
That's where you meet all the good ones.
Yeah. So now he's joined a Lutheran church in Denver. It was risky, but the FBI didn't really get much out of the Lutheran church headquarters when they did reach out to them. So he continued to slip under the radar. Being the awesome guy he was, he drove around the old parishioners and joined the church finance council, and he started to relax, realizing no one's going to catch him.
I'm safe.
Well, at this point, it's been 4 years, and I seem to have gotten away with it.
May as well get myself a gal because it was all of them that were the problem, not me.
100%. So then he met a woman named Dolores Miller. And, it doesn't rhyme with clitoris. I never got that Seinfeld joke.
I don't know
Mostly
either.
because we don't pronounce Dolores. They had a Dolores in it, and they were like, it rhymes with a female part because he couldn't remember her name, I think. And I'm like, what? And then
Dolores
it turns out...
and clitoris? Is that
clitoris, yeah. Whereas we say clitoris, so it doesn't make any sense.
Still doesn't really rhyme very well, but anyway.
No, I mean, do better, Jerry.
You wouldn't win the rhyming championships with that one.
Oh, God, no.
Well, it's not Banjo Patterson, is it?
You might get through the Northern High School Championships, but when you get to the Nationals, we're not tolerating that.
You're not winning the A.B. Patterson Poetry Award. No, you're not.
No.
My favourite poet.
No, John, no.
Good old Dolores was a divorcee, and she was about 40 years old when they met. Now, he relaxed enough not to wear suits, and he took up square dancing lessons. Oh, how about that?
Wow. He's changed.
He has, and Dolores thought he was lovely, though she knew that he had a sad background with his wife dying of cancer and everything. So he told her. Yeah.
Lead cancer.
Yeah, lead cancer. It was very sudden.
In the back of the head.
It took her quickly, yeah. So Dolores and Bob, at this point, Robert, married in 1985. And in fairness, I think he met her in sometime in the 70s, like 1976. So they didn't marry immediately, put it that way. But some old habits refused to die.
He learnt his lesson from the previous marriage.
Well, she wasn't married. She wasn't pregnant, yeah. Some old habits refused to die, and in 1986 he was fired from his job for being a recalcitrant dinosaur. Well, for not keeping up with the change cycle in his organisation. And then he was asked to piss off from Sunday school because he was too strict with the kids. He then tried to go out on his own as an independent financial consultant, but that didn't work out for him. So he basically started to repeat his past. Look out, Dolores.
Yeah.
Things were bad for him work-wise. He was 55 in a shitty economy. Things were pretty bleak in the 1980s. And Dolores was over him. Like Helen before him, she started to be mean to him and talked about leaving him. It was at this point a despondent John became friendly with his neighbour, Wanda Flannery, as he was hanging out at home a lot with no job to go to.
Was she a fish?
She wasn't, but that's what I thought of too. Things continued to go from bad to worse. The house they'd bought went down in value as the neighbourhood declined, and it must have been pretty bad. Someone beat his dog to death outside their gate, which is truly shocking.
What?
Oh.
Someone beat their own dog to death, or someone beat
Robert and Dolores' dog. Yeah, isn't that awful?
Gosh, because he barked at them the wrong way.
I don't know why, but I said that was truly shocking. And then I said, not the most shocking part of this story, I'll grant you, but it must have been a real shithole for that type of crime to take place.
Yeah, that's sad. Poor puppy.
I know, poor innocent puppy. Well, I say innocent puppy. It could have been absolutely deranged and,
rabid.
I don't know anything about why. I have no idea why that dog was beaten to death, but the way I read it, it was an innocent victim. Yes, of a bad neighbourhood. So now Wanda, the neighbour, was a Herald Sun reader, well, the US equivalent at any rate, and was very entertained by the salacious stories. Kind of news of the world is what I'm picturing. At any rate, in February 1987, whilst Wanda was perusing the World Weekly News, she saw an article about a guy named John List who had murdered his family and then disappeared.
Uh-oh.
The article had a photo of John, and Wanda saw an immediate likeness to her neighbour Bob Clark. Bob had the same weird habits of this guy, John. He rocked a suit and tie often, was into the church and taught Sunday school. List had been an accountant, and so was Bob. List was shit with money and had debts galore. So did Bob. What a coinky dink.
She's 5 from 5, this Wanda.
Deirdre Chambers.
To top it all off, Bob had a scar behind his right ear, and so did John.
Did John.
Get out.
Oh, that's it.
So what do you do with information like that?
Don't confront him. Go to the police.
Well, that's what you and I would do.
Oh, no. I've seen horror movies. I know what happens.
No, Rhonda.
Well, I'm going to say Wanda had probably seen some horror films in her time too. She didn't go to Bob.
Oh, phew.
She did go and talk to Dolores. She was very concerned that Dolores was living with a murderer and didn't know. So she went over to talk to Dolores when Bob was out, but Dolores thought she was a bit whack and threw the article out and didn't ask Bob about it at all, and Wanda left it at that.
Oh, mistake.
Then Bob, in 1988, got a job in Midlothian, Virginia. I also read Richmond, but whatever. And he and Dolores moved away. But Wanda always had her doubts. Okay, now, if this story wasn't weird enough, let me introduce Jeffrey Paul Hummel, who was a detective that had picked up the case in 1985. He was sure John List was still alive, given there was nothing to say he wasn't. Lots of people thought he was dead at this point. And because he found the crime so revolting and there were no leads coming in, they had done this, they put this photo in the article, which was an age-adjusted likeness, and no one had really picked up anything. And the Lutheran Church headquarters hadn't been able to help. They were getting nothing.
So was the age-adjusted likeness like, or was it one of those ones where it's like, that looks nothing like anyone?
I haven't seen it, but I'm going to hazard a guess that as there were simply no one came forward on that, I'm going to say it wasn't very good.
Yeah.
He decided to go to the only reputable source that made sense at the time to get more information and more leads. What's your guess on that?
Reputable source. Google? Wasn't around then.
No, it's 1985.
Paper. Newspaper?
The paper?
No, he went to a psychic.
Oh, what? Sorry, you used the word reputable.
I know. I was being sarcastic.
That threw me a mile.
As you may expect, it didn't really give them anything useful, but the psychic Elizabeth Lerner did say that John wasn't dead. He hadn't flown out of the airport, so his car had been abandoned at the airport when he left.
Right.
New York, but he hadn't. They'd assumed he'd flown somewhere, but he hadn't. He'd gone by bus or train. She also said he was with a new woman, and he'd gone southwest, which these were all correct. And Florida or Virginia would be significant.
Wow.
Like most psychic readings, though, all of this is a bit vague, and whilst it would be proved later that much of this was correct, there wasn't enough to go on. It's the whole benefit of hindsight. You make the connections to the statements that have been made, but you can't go in. Yeah, you can't go anywhere with that, right? But one of the things that she was quite specific about, she said that he would visit the graves of the children and the family on a specific date. And, in fairness, the detective thought, okay, fine. And so they had a stake. Yeah, they had a stakeout, and he did not show up. So that was proved to be not correct.
Was a specific date one of their birthdays or
I can't
the anniversary? Or
I can't recall. But she just sort of said on the 17th of blah blah, he'll be there. And I don't know. I can't remember if there was any. I would have thought that they would have staked out the graves on anniversaries or that sort of stuff. Yeah. Normally. So I'm going to hazard a guess it wasn't. Otherwise, they would have said, well, we've kind of been keeping an eye on that. Mind you, having said that, Hummel picks this case up in 1985. It's gone cold since 1973.
Yep.
So it's a long time that no one's really been paying much attention to it. Anyway, Hummel then moves on to narcotics, right? So he moves into another department and he stops working on the case. But he was so into it. So when he'd taken it over, he rearranged all the files and he'd looked at all the evidence. Like he really had a real good crack at trying to come up with something new and wrangle or whatever. Well, yeah, but he was also, a little bit obsessed by the case. He really wanted to know about it. So he's left the area, but the department, but he asked whoever it was who took over it to keep him informed about it. And he got nothing, because no one was doing anything with it. Now, around the same time, a certain program launches on the Fox network in the US. You may have heard of it. It's called America's Most Wanted.
Da, da, da.
It was quite a new program, and this guy Hummel, I think, was watching it, and because it was pretty new, they were saying, we want, the whole idea was to get the public to call in and provide additional information on cold cases. So he thought, this could be a good one for America's Most Wanted if we can get them into it. So Hummel then contacted Captain Frank Maranka, who was now in charge of the Major Crimes Unit in New Jersey. And he asked him to look into the case. So he's like in charge of the whole area. And he's like, I worked on this case. It's a cold case, but there's something in it, So Maranka's like, yeah, all right. So he looks into it and he decides to reach out to Frank. This is the new boss. Decides to reach out to America's Most Wanted, but they thought the case was too old and they didn't want to cover it. Frank wasn't, however, one to give up too easily, and I can't remember how this happened, but he happens to be at the same place as the executive producer, Michael Linder, of America's Most Wanted, and he approaches him and he says, look, there's this case that, this unsolved murder of 5 people, it's a big deal, and I think this would be good for America's Most Wanted. And the thing is, the producer gets pretty excited about it too. He's like, yeah, this is a really good case. We should do this. But the problem is the only photos they had of John List were from pre-1971. So then they enlist another Frank, so don't get confused, Frank Bender, who was a sculptor and photographer in Philadelphia. And so he did a clay reconstruction of what he thought John List would look like. What are we up to now? 20-something years, or I can't remember when this is, 18.
Late 80s, so maybe
this is
16.
Say 15. It's about 16 years after the fact, yeah. So he's trying to work out what he might look like with 15 years on him. And he was in his 40s, I think, when he first killed the family. So we're talking late 50s now.
50s, yeah.
And because Frank Bender worked with Richard Walter, who was a criminal psychologist, they were able to work out how John's personality characteristics might impact his appearance. So, we knew he was white collar. He wasn't going to go and be a farm labourer and get too roughened out. He was pretty uptight. He lived a very controlled life. So they figured he probably wouldn't have changed too much physically, but they needed to account for middle-aged spread and a bit of the droop that we all get.
Yeah, yeah.
Bit of a
and
waddle.
a receding hairline, a little bit of a waddle and a receding hairline. But they figured he'd still dress in suits, and of course that scar would still be there over his right ear. So now we've got a story, we've got a show. The show airs on the 21st of May, 1989, 18 years after the murders. And 22 million people watch it.
Oi, Wanda?
Including Wanda Flannery.
Yeah, I'm your Wanda.
Now, Wanda didn't really think the bust was a good likeness for old Bob, but she was pretty sure she'd been right about all the other characteristics that she thought were very similar, if not the same as John. So she gets her, don't ask me why, son-in-law to call the number for America's Most Wanted, and she got him to tell them Bob's new address in Virginia because Dolores and Bob had stayed in contact with their friend Wanda.
Oh, bless.
Probably more Dolores had done the staying in contact.
Probably, but remember, what's his name, John/Bob, was actually quite friendly with Wanda for quite some time. When he was unemployed and he was at home and he had nothing to do, he and Wanda got really friendly and really chatty. And that was when she was like, obviously she must have learned enough about his backstory and enough about him to go, he seems nice, but hang on a minute. She is with News of the World going, oh, my neighbour's a mass murderer. 2 FBI agents went out to check the leads. And they had about 300 leads from the America's Most Wanted episode.
Yep.
And interestingly, the first address that was on their list of leads to check out happened to be the Clark's address. So they knock on the door and they hear a vacuum switch off, and a woman comes to the door and answers it. They ask if Bob was home, but she tells them, no, he's at work. They then ask to come inside, which they did. And they show Dolores photos of John List. And she thinks, he looks a lot like my husband, but it's not my husband. She started to cry and she was trembling and she was like a bit of shock, right? 2 guys come to your door and say, we think your husband's a mass murderer. Here's an image of him from 18 years ago. And she didn't meet him until mid-70s or something. And so she's like, oh, it could be him, but I don't want to believe it's him. Anyway, she does cry and she gives them a wedding photo. And at this point, the agents are like, yeah, that's him. So she still continued throughout the trial and a little bit after to say, there's no way my husband could have done this. So after checking out the details about his scar and where he was from and what he did for a job, they were pretty convinced. One of them went to Bob's work. So one agent stayed with Dolores. The other agent went to Bob's work. And he had phoned ahead to get 2 other agents to meet him there. They met with Bob, who was apparently just like walking downstairs or walking down a corridor or something with some photocopies in his hand or something. And he sees the agents and he didn't look surprised at all. So they said, are you Mr. Bob Clark? Got some questions for you. And they asked him some questions, including, are you John Emil List? He says, no. And he says it too quickly for their liking.
Not who, what?
No, it's not me.
No, not me.
Yeah. And so they're like, oh, that's a bit dodge. And so they press further and he keeps saying no, but his face goes bright red and he has all the classic reactions of someone who's lying through their teeth and is embarrassed and caught out, while still saying, no, I'm not John List. Don't know who you're talking about. So they decide to cuff him and take him in, and they fingerprint him. And lo and behold, wouldn't you know it, that confirmed he was John List.
Wow.
Dolores still couldn't believe he could have done something like that, and she got a lawyer, David P. Bow, to draft a statement for him. John pleaded not guilty and was remanded into state custody. His bail was $1 million, and we all know he didn't have any money, so he was extradited to New Jersey, which he agreed to, but only as Bob Clark. He wouldn't go back to New Jersey as John. I'm not John List. I'm only going as Bob Clark. So he got a court-appointed lawyer who was Elijah Miller. Then Helen's sister Jean confronted him, so the first person who he'd known from his previous life, and asked why he'd done it. And he said, because there was no other way.
He's not an ideas man.
He's very linear thinker. You know, I talk about this quite a lot, where I see in men around me that they make up their mind there's only one solution to something and they can't think through, like,
outside the box.
Yeah, and I think a bit of that's happened here. If only he'd found another way of looking at it.
Let's just plot it out on a whiteboard, John. I feel like there are a number of ways.
If he's my husband, it's the only way. Because my husband, like, I go, you could do this like that. And he's like, no, I've already thought about it. It must be done like this. Permutations and combinations plus engineering equals, that's a no from me.
Yeah.
Okay, the defence case basically said he had done it. They didn't say he wasn't guilty, even though he pled not guilty, but argued some sort of diminished responsibility, as in he had a fragmented...
Because it was the only way?
No, he had fragmented obsessive-compulsive personality, and he couldn't deal with the overwhelming issues and difficulties that he was having.
Fragmented obsessive-compulsive personality.
He acted to save his family in a godless world.
What? Is that what they said?
I know. Yeah.
My God.
The prosecution, of course, on the other side, counted
weren't
that
lapping that shit up.
No, that he was evil, calculated and cruel. He was unhappy in his life and wanted a new one, free of the old mistakes and mess. He had maliciously murdered his family and was fully aware of what he was doing. His own confessions, set-up letters, ballistics and the autopsies indicated he was totally in control. He was found guilty on 5 counts of murder in the first degree and was sentenced to 5 consecutive life terms.
Hey, that's better. Yes, excellent use of the word consecutive.
The trial on 5 counts of murder in the first degree lasted 7 days, which isn't very long.
Yeah, quick.
John Emil List died in prison in 2008. He was 82 years old.
18 years, that's, I mean, nowhere near what he was sentenced to, but, you know,
at
least it wasn't a year later or something, yeah.
Well, yeah. Now, I couldn't find anything further on Dolores. She was born in 1937, same year as Mum, so she'd be 86 or 87 now if she was alive. The only mentions of her are that she couldn't believe that the man she knew could be a cold-blooded killer. But then again, when you think of the Golden State Killer or BTK, their wives had absolutely no idea that they were murderers too.
Nor John Wayne Gacy.
Yeah, I don't think she had a clue. You know, wherever she is, I hope the rest of her life was as trouble-free as possible. So, what are your thoughts?
It's very disturbing.
Isn't it? Yeah.
I'm not okay with the dog.
And it's such an incidental point too.
Yeah, but
he didn't
honestly,
beat the dog to death. It was beaten to death by someone, some random in the street.
Not okay with that. But what on earth, this whole thing of I've got problems in my life, what I'll do is I'll kill my mum, my wife, and my 3 children so I can go and start again.
Yeah, it's not a great solution. I mean, it kind of was. It was a neat solution.
I'm
wasn't
not saying
a morally
it's not a
good
great solution. I'm saying he's a fucking asshole. Like,
yeah, it's a nasty solution, but it worked.
I'd obviously worked for him for quite some time, but
18 years.
Imagine going and picking your daughter up from school, rushing inside so you can get her as she walks in the door. Like,
well, he'd already killed his wife and his mother by then, so I think he was just committed to the whole thing. He said, I remember him
premeditated.
It's totally premeditated.
So he planned that.
I read somewhere that he described it as like an assignment. He had an assignment and he had to complete his assignment. Yeah, it was a mission. Yeah. It was like, I had this thing to do and That's I was
Just
going to
don't
do
care.
it.
You didn't have that. No one assigned it to you but yourself. You're just a fuck.
weirdo.
No, matron. I'm not listening to his explanation. God, it's just, I mean, asking them how they want to go, just in case, on the off chance that I come home and snap one day.
It does smack of psychopathy because, like, there's no, or at least sociopathy, there's no empathy, there's no
None.
love, there's no sadness, there's no remorse. He said, I think I already said something along the lines of that he only thought about them on the anniversaries of their death, I think, or their birthdays or something. He gave them no thought after that, apart from he might spare a passing thought on the anniversary of the murders or birthdays, one or the other. But, it's just like, well, that's done. It's a real sociopath type thing to do. And I don't think I've read anywhere that, like, well, he wasn't diagnosed in any way, but it really does to me sound like a sociopath.
Yeah, I mean, I guess a sociopath's solution may be, but actually going through with it, there's that extra element of not just sitting there going, oh, God, I could just do this one day, but actually getting the gun, planning it all out, going through with it.
I think that's not all, but lots of people have
sociopathic tendencies.
Sociopathic or psychopathic tendencies, but they don't act on them. Or lots of people are psychopaths or sociopaths by the definition, but they don't kill people.
That's kind of what I'm saying.
But there are people that do, and his behaviour to me matches that.
Yeah. So I'm not saying he's not one. I'm just saying it doesn't justify the action.
Of course it doesn't.
Nope, not okay with him. I feel for Dolores. Like, finding out all of that must be heartbreaking.
That's a lot, isn't it?
That's an awful lot. Yeah, it is an awful lot. I like Wanda. Good job, Wanda.
I don't mind Wanda. I think Wanda's quite funny.
She can put 2 and 2 together and get 4, which I like. Oh, punishment. I mean, I would like him to not be able to start his life again. I think that whole notion of I can go and do that and then I'm scot-free and everything is good again, in some ways is really quite scary. In some ways I kind of wanted him to be locked in that ballroom with his decaying family so he could see exactly what he's done and not escape it and not think that everything's fine, because I don't know how you could do that and then just go on. And there's obviously a certain personality type where that can happen because it happens. People kill people all the time. But, I mean, your kids, what have the kids done? Even if Helen was an asshole and his mum was an asshole, what have the kids done? He could have killed those two and left. What did you think from a punishment perspective?
Well, in light of Swanee not being here, I've been thinking about the things that motivate him, and he obviously really took a great deal of pride in his appearance. He wore a suit and tie all the time, and it was like to the point where a neighbour saw him mowing the lawn in his suit and tie. He was always very stiff, beyond well dressed, really overdressed for things. So I feel like making him wear a pair of Crocs and maybe some board shorts and a wife beater, and not letting him have his hair done, and there's no hair product. So he just looks extremely scruffy and a touch feral. And I think that would be a punishment around his need to be controlled and precise and where have the suit and tie and look like an accountant or a senior executive type. And then I think I'm going to put him into a Sunday school scenario where there's this giant thick perspex between him and all the kids in the Sunday school. And he's a Sunday school teacher and none of the kids are following anything he wants. Like he's got no control whatsoever over any of the kids in the class, and they're just running amok. And he's standing there in his Crocs and his board shorts and his wife beater, frustrated to the nth degree because no one's listening to him and he's not in control and he's not a big man and he's not important. And I think he just kind of has to sit in that state to just get some humility, I guess. Ultimately, all of those things were more important than your children. But again, I'm not even sure about that. I still think to some degree he was just a sociopath or a psychopath and just could turn off turn off or turn on feelings. Because he was a good Lutheran, he married Helen because she said she was pregnant. She did get pregnant relatively quickly after they were married, but he was like, I'm going to do the right thing. I'm doing the moral thing. To then turn around and kill your whole family. The imagery, unfortunately, I did see the crime scene photos, and the imagery of the mother really stuck with me because his mother reminded me of my mum. And I just thought, to walk up to an old lady who trusts you implicitly, you're her son, and she has, even though she henpecks him and whatever, she wants only the best for him. She signed over her power of attorney. She helped him buy the house.
Right.
She's probably, doing household stuff for them and looking out for the kids and whatever, picking on the wife. I mean, that's what mothers-in-laws do. To walk up to her as a Judas kiss and then shoot her in the face. I mean, fucking hell.
What a fuck. That's kind of why I was going, I wanted him locked in the room with the family so that there's no dissociating from it. I don't want that for the family, but for him, so he can watch what he's created or never get away from what he's done. But he's horrible.
Then set the house on fire.
Well, I don't know. Wish there was a nice way to clean
with
the
him
house.
In it. With him in
but
it.
we wanted to keep the house.
I know, the house was great. It's gone now, unfortunately, but it was beautiful. Yeah.
Wow.
All right. Well, there you go. Familicide, not familiacide. Familiacide. And family annihilators. What a load of old shit.
We don't like them?
No, we don't like them at all. And on that note, as we say every week, miss you already.
Ciao.
Ciao.
Thanks for listening to Trial by Wine. You can contact us at trialbywine@gmail.com. Please rate, review and subscribe to Trial by Wine on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. If you'd like to support us, you can become a patron at www.patreon.com, Trial by Wine, or visit our website www.trialbywine.com to donate to us. Your support will help us cover many more cases and apply wacky sentences. We really appreciate you listening and hope you tell everyone about us. Our cover art is by John Christo and music is by Beauchamp from pixabay.com.